is different is in mercantilism, money is wealth. If money is wealth, it's not really about finding cash. I think we talked about this, right? You must have, right, Karen? Because you knew what the answer was, right? When did we talk about this? We talked about this.
Was it in the first unit?
I think it was in the first unit. Okay? It's not money, it's profit. More gold goes in than goes out. It's the definition of profit, right? That's money. And so if you can get a favorable trade balance, then you're going to get money. Mercantilism. Now we look at colonization. Here's the mommy country. So we're England. Now if you remember, England's not a really big country. Now, they do happen to have this colony here in the Americas. But what happens to the colony in the Americas? They break away. Bad example. They do happen to have colonies in Canada, but they didn't start those colonies. Who started them? France. In fact, they stole them, right? French and Indian War. And in fact, they have colonies over here in India. But in the 1700s, they don't actually have India. They are there with a whole bunch of other people, like the Dutch, and like the Portuguese, and like the French, and like other folks, right? And so everybody and their uncle is over here in India. Nobody has a monopoly on India. Mercantilism is the idea, and English, the ones that truly understand this, mercantilism is the idea that your colony provides raw goods, things that are flat, cheap, right? You send them back to the mommy country. The mommy country then finishes them. So I send wood back to England, and I turn the wood into tables. And then I sell that table back to the colony. And so I sell the finished goods. Not only am I selling it to my colony, but where else am I selling it to? I'm selling it to Africa. I'm going to sell it to India. I'm going to sell it to wherever I can. Because I've got cool technology, and my tables are going to look better than any of the tables that the Aborigines do. And when I do that, because this is finished, it's a high price. What have I established? Buy low, sell high. What do I got? Profit. That's money. That's the source of money. It's the new age. So we get money this way. Profit. And so you can see a connection between mercantilism and colonization. What do these empires want in order to get? They want colonies everywhere. But don't get me wrong. America is a huge example. When you study American history, we talk about the shot heard around the world. Does anybody remember what that is?
It's in Boston.
It's when Battle of Lexington and Concord. Yes, go ahead, tell me.
It's when there was a standoff between the British and the Americans.
Yes.
And they both had their guns drawn.
Yes.
And they heard a gunshot. No one knows who fired it. It might have been a hunter, I think.
Could have been, never know.
And that's what started the war between our industrial...
Revolutionary War!
Revolutionary War.
Totally. Why is it the shot heard around? I mean, was it physically heard beyond those guys?
No.
It caused them to fight when they weren't fighting before. If you think about this, the colony breaking away from the mother country, had that ever happened before? Prior to the Americans? No. 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 We've had revolutions, that happens all the time, trying to topple your own government, but having a colony made of your own people breaking away from the motherland doesn't happen. And this was a big deal. England sunk a lot of money in this, an 8-year war, 1776 to 1782, but in fact we started fighting in 1775. So we're there for a very long time. What don't they want to ever happen again? So what's the lesson that England takes from this? What did they do wrong with the United States?
They allowed too much freedom.
Totally. But do we have a point? I mean, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these, Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Do we have a point? Especially since this is English, right? Who came up with that phrase?
John Locke.
John Locke, who was?
British.
He was English, right? It's his ideas. It's his ideas. That's why Thomas Jefferson wrote them, because he knew full well the English Parliament believed it. It was their justification for kicking out the king and making the Parliament leader. So they totally believed this. If you believe this, then did you give them too much freedom?
No.
No, you actually gave them too little freedom. And there's a lot of debate over this. And we hardly ever do this because we just don't have time. But if you ever study English history about the American Revolution, there was a lot of debate. People saying, give them representation. They say no representation without, no taxation without representation. Give them representation. You're going to lose this. You're going to screw this up. And the people that were saying that were right. They looked back and they said, see, I told you. And English colonial policy changed as a result. They wouldn't do it anymore. And so how do they do this? What's the solution? If we didn't give them enough rights, what do we do?
Give them more rights.
How? It's hard, but it's actually really important. It's not feudalism. Feudalism was that you go over to the other territory, like Spain takes over Mexico, and you create a governor, but what you're really doing, feudalism is about land, so you're creating manors. The best way for us to understand this in American history is think of a plantation. That's where they got their wealth. They would have people on the plantation. Well, this isn't slavery like in the United States slavery that we're thinking about south in the 1800s. This is actually what dominated most of the Middle Ages from the fall of Rome up to the modern era for 1,000 years. They weren't being cruel and unusual. That's all they knew. So you divide this up. You have the lord of this estate, and all these people are vassals. And these lords are all vassals to the king back home. Right? That's feudalism. And it doesn't work because over time these guys might decide to just be their own folks. That nobody wants to do that. But on the other hand, what happens if you just have the country being ruled by the crown and all your other Brits are just being forced and you're using the colony purely to get more wealth, which is exactly what it's for, right? That's the whole point of mercantilism. We sell them, the finished products, we tax the heck out of them. What's the third option? Third option is that we don't have the English here at all. You might have an English governor, but they don't have plantations. I mean, they may have some few people, but who's really running the government? Locals. Locals. In India, if you're arrested, if you're an Indian, and you get arrested, who are you going to be in front of?
The locals.
Other Indians. It's going to be locals. Now, if you do this right, then these guys will never want to break away from England, right? Because of why?
Because they still rely on you.
Totally. What they see England is a pipeline of cultural diffusion. What could England possibly give to these locals? This is an easy one, right? Money, guns, technology. They give them whatever they need for these locals to be above their neighbors. Because it's corporate knowledge base. This corporate knowledge base is much higher than their corporate knowledge base. This isn't, saying that they're heathens or whatnot. It's just a reality. They don't have the technology in India. The locals can't do it. But the English can. And if you can give some of that high technology stuff over to a few locals, not all, just a few, and make these guys rulers, then all you have to do is have just a few folks and say, well, you're in charge. How is this different from the feudalism? And I'm not going to say this. I'm going to ask you, so you guys have to switch the gear on instead of listening and tell me. How is this different from feudalism? You have to remember what feudalism is. What do you do with feudalism? What defined feudalism?
There's a connection between lords and the king.
That's right. So who, the lord in the feudal place in Spain, right? Who is that guy?
He's the leader.
Sure. He's the guy who founded the island, right? Columbus's people. He's the guy who, Ponce de Leon's guy. He's the guy that was handpicked by the leader to rule. What about the folks that are on his plantation?
There's locals that work for him.
Peasants, right? Just like you had back in the Middle Ages, or peasants. This is what you do. How is that different from colonization?
Locals run themselves.
In colonization, the locals are going to be the lords, right? The locals are going to be in charge of the plantations. The locals are going to be doing local government. Well, why would this benefit England at all? What's the whole purpose of mercantilism? If wealth is not defined by land, does it matter if you've got 20 square feet of a port or if you've got 20,000 miles? Because where's your wealth?
People.
That's feudalism. In the profit. It's totally the profit, right? Totally the profit. So if that's the case, go ahead.
So it's basically like they don't really care who's running America as long as they're making a profit.
Totally. It's just what you want more than anything. You want peace. And isn't this ironic? Because when we think of colonization, what do we normally think? Europeans going in there, bashing heads, breaking, Columbus. And the thing is, part of this is that we do not distinguish between the explorers and the colonies. But it's a huge difference. Columbus is part of the old feudal system. He wants his plantation. But when we get into colonization, you're not running plantation. You might have one, especially in parts of Africa towards the late 1800s. You might have a coffee plantation. But here, you're actually a businessman. You're just a farmer. You're settling out there. In the beginning, England doesn't like that. Because the next question is, the first question is, what's the difference between colonization and feudalism? Well, the second question, what's the difference between colonization and what the United States was? Why did we break away? Why does England not want us to come up again? In a plantation, the local, the Spanish guy is in charge of the locals who are working for him. But in the Americas, you might have an English governor, but who's doing all the work? Yeah, the South is obviously an exception. But if you remember, why did we have why was there the Civil War? Because the South was like a holdover of old feudalism. And the North was like the modern mercantile trade base. Two different types of society. They couldn't continue to exist. The reason why the United States was a danger to England is that you have little England way over there. If they were trained in England and they're now over there, what's to prevent them from using all of English's resources? I mean, right off the bat. Whose idea was we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights? Is this an American who wrote this? No, it's an English person that wrote this. So you're taking all of the corporate knowledge, the best of the corporate knowledge of England, and you're just taking it and just giving it to them. Would you, if you were English, put up with being a colony? Like England being a colony? Fat chance. Instead, that lack of putting up with it is what we exported to the United States. They don't want that anymore. So the modern colonization keeps these guys separate. Do we really want to be giving all of our secrets? We give some, we give them money, we give them guns, we give them some technology, but do we want them to have all the secrets? We'll train a few of them, but they take care of themselves. They make sure there's peace. And that way, we just deal with profit. Because that's the whole purpose of colony, is to have more profit. You have all these colonies. In some spots, it may be a trading port. In India, at the very beginning, you had maybe 20 different ports. But of course with mercantilism it's a problem because you have to have the raw material coming in, so this has to be cheap, and then you have to be able to sell the finished product. What happens if you've got the Dutch who's doing the same thing, they're right next to you? What may happen?
You might not make as much profit.
Yes, they might be also selling raw materials, but they may be the ones that are selling the finished product back, and not you. So you're buying cheap goods, but you can't sell the finished product. So no profit. Totally a bad idea. Or, this is even worse, you can't get the raw materials. So you're getting these expensive items, but you have to pay a lot of money for those items. Either one is a terrible idea. So imperialism, this sense of colonization, is going to usually lead to what? When you have all these ports right next to each other, what's it going to lead to, generally speaking? Peace? Why not?
There's competition.
The irony of all ironies. What do they want more than anything in their colony?
Peace.
They do. They really want it, so they can just trade. But that's the locals. Right? When you're talking about the Germans or the French or the Portuguese or the Spanish, you don't want them to be in there. So, oddly enough, we're going to be fighting with each other quite a bit.